Respiratory System. Chapter 16. Bio 160. Introduction. The respiratory system consists of tubes that filter incoming air and transport it into the microscopic alveoli where gases are exchanged. Introduction. The entire process of exchanging gases between the atmosphere and body cells is called respiration and consists of the following: ventilation, gas exchange between blood and lungs, gas transport in the bloodstream, gas exchange between the blood and body cells, and cellular respiration. Breathing mechanism. Ventilation, breathing, the movement of air in and out of the lungs, is composed of inspiration and expiration. Inspiration. Atmospheric pressure is the force that moves air into the lungs. When pressure on the inside of the lungs decreases, higher pressure air flows in from the outside. Breathing mechanism. Air pressure inside the lungs is decreased by increasing the size of the thoracic cavity. Due to surface tension between the two layers of pleura, the lungs follow with the chest wall and expand. Muscles involved in expanding the thoracic cavity include the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Breathing mechanism. As the lungs expand in size, surfactant keeps the alveoli from sticking to each other so they do not collapse when internal air pressure is low. Breathing mechanism. Expiration. The forces of expiration are due to the elastic recoil of lung and muscle tissues and from the surface tension within the alveoli. Forced expiration is aided by thoracic and abdominal wall muscles that compress the abdomen against the diaphragm. Breathing mechanisms. Respiratory air volumes and capacities. The measurement of different air volumes is called spirometry, and it describes 4 distinct respiratory volumes. 1 inspiration followed by expiration is called a respiratory cycle. The amount of air that enters or leaves the lungs during one respiratory cycle is the tidal volume. Breathing mechanisms. During forced inspiration, an additional volume, the inspiratory reserve volume, can be inhaled into the lungs. IRV plus TV gives us the inspiratory capacity. During a maximal forced expiration, an expiratory reserve volume can be exhaled, but there remains a residual volume in the lungs. Adding the two together gives us the functional reserve capacity. Breathing mechanisms. Vital capacity is the tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve and expiratory reserve volumes combined. Vital capacity plus residual volume is the total lung capacity. Anatomic dead space is air remaining in the bronchial tree. Control of breathing. Normal breathing is a rhythmic, involuntary act even though the muscles are under voluntary control. Respiratory center. Groups of neurons in the brainstem comprise the respiratory center, which controls breathing by causing inspiration and expiration and by adjusting the rate and depth of breathing. Control of breathing. The components of the respiratory center include the rhythmicity center of the medulla and the pneumotaxic area of the pons. The medullary rhythmicity center includes 2 groups of neurons, the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group. Control of breathing. The dorsal respiratory group is responsible for the basic rhythm of breathing. The ventral respiratory group is active when more forceful breathing is required. Neurons in the pneumotaxic area control the rate of breathing. Control of breathing factors affecting breathing. Chemicals, lung tissue stretching, and emotional state affect breathing. Chemosensitive areas, central chemoreceptors, are associated with the respiratory center and are sensitive to changes in the blood concentration of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions. Control of breathing. If either carbon dioxide or hydrogen ion concentrations rise, the central chemoreceptors signal the respiratory center, and breathing rate increases. Peripheral chemoreceptors in the carotid sinuses and aortic arch sense changes in blood oxygen concentration, transmit impulses to the respiratory center, and breathing rate and tidal volume increase. Control of breathing. An inflation reflex, triggered by stretch receptors in the visceral pleura, bronchioles, and alveoli, helps to prevent overinflation of the lungs during forceful breathing. Hyperventilation lowers the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood. Alveolar gas exchanges. The alveoli are the only sites of gas exchange between the atmosphere and the blood. Alveoli. The alveoli are tiny sacs clustered at the distal ends of the alveolar ducts. Alveolar gas exchange respiratory membrane. The respiratory membrane consists of the epithelial cells of the alveolus, the endothelial cells of the capillary, and the two fused basement membranes of these layers. Gas exchange occurs across this respiratory membrane. Alveolar gas exchange diffusion across the respiratory membrane. Gases diffuse from areas of higher pressure to areas of lower pressure. In a mixture of gases, each gas accounts for a portion of the total pressure. The amount of pressure each gas exerts is equal to its partial pressure. Alveolar gas exchange. When the partial pressure of oxygen is higher in the alveolar air than it is in the capillary blood, oxygen will diffuse into the blood. When the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is greater in the blood than in the alveolar air, carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the blood and into the alveolus. Alveolar gas exchange. A number of factors favor increased diffusion: more surface area, shorter distance, greater solubility of gases, and a steeper partial pressure gradient. Gas transport. Gases are transported in association with molecules in the blood or dissolved in the plasma. Oxygen transport. Over 98% of oxygen is carried in the blood bound to hemoglobin of red blood cells, producing oxyhemoglobin. Gas transport. Oxyhemoglobin is unstable in areas where the concentration of oxygen is low, and gives up its oxygen molecules in those areas. More oxygen is released as the blood concentration of carbon dioxide increases, as the blood becomes more acidic, and as blood temperature increases. Gas transport. Carbon dioxide transport. Carbon dioxide may be transported dissolved in blood plasma, as carbaminohemoglobin, or as bicarbonate ions. Most carbon dioxide is transported in the form of bicarbonate. Gas transport. When carbon dioxide reacts with water in the plasma, carbonic acid is formed slowly, but instead much of the carbon dioxide enters red blood cells, where the enzyme carbonic anhydrase speeds this reaction.